Waikato to Manawatu, including...
appropriately a song about creation care from Kiwi artist Phil Joel. That is Better Than I Found It. It is just on 9 minutes after 9 o'clock on Rima.
The panel. It's the election conversation on Rima.
Andrew Urquhart with you on the program today, talking the environment between now and 10 o'clock. Three very special guests with me. First up, introducing Mark Hooper. He is a Taranaki dairy farmer. He is president of the Taranaki Local Board of Federated Farmers and also a member of the National Board. He joins us now. Kia ora, thank you so much for your time today.
Hi, Andrew. Yeah, great to be here. Thanks.
And also joining me in studio, I have Ronan Wallace from Forest and Bird Youth, a organisation for conservation and looking after various aspects of the environment. Ronan, from the youth division of that organisation. Kia ora, thanks for your time today. And finally, welcoming to the studio, Sarah Woodfield. Sarah is a member of Arosha, particularly a member of the Auckland division of that, a Christian organisation, engaging with communities and churches for nature conservation. Sarah, kia ora, thank you for your time today.
Ata Maria.
So lots of things to cover, talking about the environment, and I know for some people the environment is the key issue. This is the thing that will influence who they're going to vote for this up-and-coming election, and hey, it is a complicated beast. We saw, of course, at the beginning of the year, weather events impacting both urban and rural environments, and for many people, of course, they're saying, hey, this is climate change, this isn't going to go away, we're going to see more and more of these types of events, and hey, even more evidence that something needs to be done in this space. Mark, starting with you, when it comes to tackling or mitigating the impact of climate change, do you feel this is primarily a government responsibility? Are they the ones best placed as the regulator to bring about real change, in your opinion?
Well, I think I would start just by, you made reference there to the weather events at the beginning of the year, and obviously had a huge impact on a lot of our farming families and their businesses.
Yeah.
And there's a long road to recovery happening there. And absolutely, government assisting in the recovery and the restoration of infrastructure is essential in that space. But I guess the broader question here is whether government regulated actions, ultimately have any bearing on that kind of outcome. We certainly see changes in weather patterns, but whether by way of introducing taxes on farms, etc., actually has any long-term impact on that is somewhat debatable. So I think it's more important that we look at the resilience of individual farm businesses and what the role that government has in terms of the impact and the policies and things that they put in place over farm businesses, enabling them to manage their own environment and the emissions that are associated with that in a practical and profitable way. And that gives our communities a lot better strength and resilience going forward in future weather events.
So as well as the legislation, some, I suppose, incentivisation or resourcing or equipping people to make decisions locally for their own environment, perhaps?
Yeah, well, I guess the big outstanding issue, of course, for farmers, and the one that's been getting a lot of publicity, is around the methane emissions of farms, and the government's numerous attempts to look at introducing some kind of tax or emissions pricing around methane. Methane, of course, being a short-lived gas, it doesn't have a net zero target. We have a gross emissions reduction target in New Zealand, and we've argued quite strongly for some time that that target goes above and beyond a warming implication. And to be able to implement that target by way of regulation would have quite a negative impact on profitability on farms. And so I think that's the key underlying issue that we have to address, that anything that is implemented, we have to look at the sustainability of farm businesses, because these are the heart and soul of communities, especially if you're looking at areas like the East Coast and what have you, that just rely on the agribusiness sector for their sustainability of their communities in general. So we've got to look at supporting those farm businesses in whatever way we can, really.
Ronan, wanted to bring you in on this one because, climate change and, fear of climate change, very much the cry of current younger generations. Whilst they aren't landowners, okay, boomer, they do perhaps have the most to lose from deteriorating climate and environment. Lots of protests in this area, but from your point of view, I mean, as well as protesting, for the younger generation, is there action that can be taken as well instead of blaming the government?
Yeah, I think if you look at the youth protests, as you mentioned, there's been a lot of calls from from youth for the government to take action on this and calls for people to take this seriously. I think, I'm an Aucklander myself, I think seeing the flooding in the streets, it's quite stark to see what can happen and to see the reality of climate change, to see it sort of brought to the forefront, what's actually happening in our communities, in our cities, and then to see it happening again in rural communities so soon after, to see it happening all over the country, in rural communities, in urban communities, to see it happening everywhere. I think the reality is this is happening. We do need people to take action. We do need governments to take action.
Personal action as well, though, from those protesting?
Yes, we do need personal action. That is the reality. But I think leaving it all up to personal action is, I don't think that's enough. Yep. I think leaving it all up to individual action won't. I think leaving it all up to personal action, some people won't take that personal action, some people will take heaps, and some people won't take enough.
We're not necessarily going to recycle our way out of climate change.
Exactly. We're not going to recycle our way out of climate change. Some people are going to take the bus all of the time, and some people won't. Yep. That's just the reality of it. We need a government with the courage to take those actions, and that goes for governments of all colours, governments of all left-wing, right-wing, whatever governments we get. We need governments with the courage to take the steps there and to take action and to assist communities of whether they be rural or urban and taking whatever steps are necessary.
Sarah, your comments on this one, because Rona was talking about government action and we're in the middle of a political campaign at the moment. Everybody wants to save the world, and they'll have strategies and slogans as to how they will do that. Is it naive, though? I mean, picking up on Mark's comment beforehand, is it naive to think that, okay, if we've got the right slogan, if we've got the right policy, that we can actually stop climate change? We like putting our hand up and saying, stop wind, all those sorts of things. Let's tackle climate change. I mean, it's a great slogan, but is it a little bit light on details? Is it a bit naive, do you think?
So I'm really grateful that when I had a look at all the current parties in Parliament at present, they all have a plan. So there's no question that this is an issue that needs addressing. The question is how it's being addressed and how serious people are taking it. So if you believe the science, which isn't under debate in our political system,
we're well over tipping point on that one.
That's exactly it. And so we have to have structural change to have the effect that we need. It's not too late, but it needs to happen now. And it's a reality that individual action is needed, but if you don't price carbon, if you don't deal with the methane, which while it is a short-lived gas, it's hugely more impactful on the greenhouse gas situation than carbon. All of this needs to be happening, and it needs to be happening sooner rather than later. And this isn't just an issue for the environment, it's an issue for people. As discussed, people are being impacted, not just in New Zealand, but around the world. The refugees coming out of various places where there are climate disasters, and while weather always happens, the climate crisis is exacerbating, it's exaggerating, it's making everything worse. And we need a government, as Ronan said, that has the courage to actually act and not just tinker around the edges, not just add in, make a change here or a change there. We really need structural change, and the big stuff. It's hard, and there's going to be transition needed because farmers are going to be impacted, and other industries are going to be impacted as well. Tourism. If we price carbon accurately, airfares are going to cost a lot more, and that's going to impact how many people can fly around the country and around the world. And we need a plan for what we're going to do to deal with this. It's not an if, it's a when.
Interesting point that you make, that it's no longer just the environment. If you love trees, vote green. That all the political parties have got policies which make some statement about climate change. And hey, if people listening to this are saying environment's one of my key motivators for voting this year, encourage you to go into detail into the various policies and to consider which one most aligns with your views and values. We're not going to be able to get into all the details of all the party policies today, but certainly encourage you to do that and encourage you to stay listening as well. Talking more on the topic of environment as we, I suppose, consider our decisions heading towards the election. Back with more from the panel in just a moment.
The Panel. It's the election conversation on Rima.
Multimag, a testimonial from Mary. I found
The Panel. It's the election conversation on Rima.
And talking the environment today on the election panel, is this something which would motivate you in terms of the choices that you will be making this year? As we've mentioned already, all of the political parties have a policy on the environment and climate change and a whole bunch of other things. Would recommend that you check that out online. Ask some local candidates some awkward questions, make an informed decision as we go to the polls this year. The issue I'm wanting to focus on next, though, is the role that all of us have through government regulation and policy, but all of us as individuals, the role that we have in protecting and restoring our environment. Ronan, wanting to start with you. When it comes to, I suppose, New Zealand's precious biodiversity, we've got some aspects of our environment which are unique to Aotearoa. a very good conservation estate in some ways, and a reasonable level of protection there. And I know lots of campaigns towards predator-free zones within New Zealand. Is enough being done to protect our biodiversity, do you think?
First off, you said it there, it's a very precious biodiversity, very unique biodiversity, very amazing biodiversity would be the first thing I would say there. Yep. We've got really precious, amazing indigenous species in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Yep. But frankly, I don't think there's enough being done to protect our amazing, our unique, our precious creatures. We've got Forest and Bird Youth have some really important campaigns on this Labour government. When they came in, they said that they would have no new mines on conservation estates. That's not a promise that they've kept, unfortunately. Yeah. And we think that that's a promise that all governments should, whether Labour gets in again or whether there is a change of government, that's a promise that we think should be maintained. There should be no new mines on conservation estate. That's something that's really important, that looks after native animals that are in those conservation estates. There's other things like that where there's just risks to native animals and indigenous animals.
It's kind of like saying, oh, we'll just have a few feral cats in this predator-free area.
Exactly. I mean, there's yes, when you allow one, where does it stop? Yeah. We need to look after our indigenous animals, and when you allow one, it gets quite concerning, and yes, it's very important. And
certainly, and even recently seen the devastation in the impact of you're saying very precious environment, but very vulnerable in some ways.
Exactly, and you said it there where you mentioned asking candidates uncomfortable and awkward questions. I think that's something that people should be doing, and challenging them on issues like that.
I mean, it is all very well to blame the government and say, hey, gosh, they should be doing more, and ask awkward questions to the environment, but hey, we should also ask awkward questions of ourselves. Sarah, your comments on this? Yes, it involves some government policy, some incentivisation to turn the ordinary citizen into an eco-warrior such as yourself. I mean, take this as a compliment. But look, some people are into it more than others, but if we incentivised it right, it would be possible for all of us to be involved in having a positive impact on our environment. I mean, personally, I can't afford a Tesla. Some subsidies in that direction are useful. I know there's also some policies about encouraging people to generate their own electricity for some parties. We need some government help, but we're all responsible, right?
Yeah, so one of the mistakes I think that humanity has made in the last however many years is separating conservation being happening over there and the people live over here. And actually it's all intertwined. And so, Arosha has local projects where we partner with, there's a stream that's at the end of my street, Te Awanga in Avondale, and we do conservation restoration work there. We also have predator-free projects in a place called Karioi in Raglan, and that's partnering with iwi, with council, with DOC, with local landowners to have a predator-free zone on the mountain. But what I also would say is that every individual can make choices. I don't have a car anymore. That means I deal with cycling and transport.
Flat tyre this morning.
Flat tyre this morning.
Exactly.
Don't get me started. That's fine. I'm here. But if no city has built its way out of its transport woes by building more roads. You just have to go to LA and see what more roads looks like and how bad that is. So we really need a government with the courage to say, actually, we need to do things differently here. We need to be pushing the public transport, making it as effective and efficient and useful. If I could have bussed here this morning, I would have, but I would have been here late, so I had to catch a Zoomie. But that requires the government to mandate that to intensification. It's not awesome, but it's better than spreading out into productive land outside the cities. And it means that everything is more efficient. You can provide services, you can be closer to your local doctor, everything that you don't have to drive everywhere. But we need the infrastructure to make that work. And at the moment, you have to be committed to not have a vehicle. Trust me, I know.
And I suppose in an urban environment that is more achievable, that's more accessible than perhaps a rural environment. Mark, wanting to get your thoughts on this one. I mean, some people might think that those who live off the land, those that's part of their business and lifestyle, some might think that they have a higher responsibility when it comes to protecting and restoring their environment. Any thoughts on that view?
Yeah, well, I think that is what we see playing out in reality anyway, and I think also the other thing to understand is that farmers are naturally also conservationists.
Yep.
They tend to be intergenerational, and they're looking to future generations and looking to methodology that enables that business to pass on. Of course, in order to do that, in order to have good environmental outcomes, you have to be economically profitable
Yes.
as well. And so it's really important that farmers don't have those kind of restrictions on them that prevent them from being able to run successful businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And also, what you find is that a lot of voluntary work goes into particularly biodiversity protection over the years. So take, for example, the QE2 covenant process. It's been in place in New Zealand for quite some time. I think there's something like 4,500 to 5,000 QE2 registered covenants in New Zealand. These are all voluntary, probably covering somewhere around 180,000 hectares of land that this is private property that's been put into long-term covenants.
Yep.
If you look at what the reality of our biodiversity portfolio is, you find that there's about 2.8 million hectares of native vegetation that's been retained on sheep and beef farms across New Zealand. And so obviously getting the settings right in terms of a national policy statement around Indigenous biodiversity is really important to those farm businesses. They need to have clear legislation that shows them what their responsibilities are. It needs to be unambiguous. And unfortunately, what the government has done is that they've made it quite a complex area of understanding, requiring specialist ecological input in order to be able to assess areas. And this just tends to add more cost to those businesses and actually takes away often from more positive biodiversity outcomes. Mm-hmm. Predator-free is another one. Farmers are voluntary workers in that space, obviously doing a lot around possum and mustelid control at this point in time. And generally those things, having the right incentives, as you mentioned, have often kicked off some of those projects. Yep. But then it's left to the farmers to continue them. And so I think those are areas also where you can get good community support to come in. Farmers have the land available, they have the opportunity to increase biodiversity options, but sometimes they lack perhaps the time, the labour, and perhaps the financial support to be able to fence and pest control and protect areas. So it's a good opportunity there for community projects to work hand in hand with private landowners.
I mean, not just the townies that need the incentives and the regulation, and I suppose not punitively, but certainly encouraging managing intensity, phosphate use, protecting rivers and streams, those sorts of things, to share ideas that work from one part of New Zealand to the other, to, I suppose, smooth those pathways for people to make better choices about the land that they live on?
Yeah. Look, I mean, if you take my region, for example, Taranaki, we've had a riparian program, a voluntary riparian program for a long time. And again, it's just about having some right incentives and support around it. And that support in our case has come from our regional council, who's facilitated the access to wholesale purchasing of plants. And thousands of kilometres of streams have been fenced and planted. For the last decade, Taranaki farmers have probably invested in about 600,000 native plants per annum, which have gone into riparian plantings. And again, this is all unregulated, but it's just incentivised in the right way with the right support to enable that to do. So the opportunity is huge, but we don't need rigorous regulatory settings that actually create more havoc than they do help.
Carrot rather than a stick. I mean, that's a better agricultural metaphor anyway in that regard. Just wanting your comments on this, because it seems to me that the tide has turned. Previously it would have been, okay, farmers are the bad guys and it's the environmentalists against the farmers. Do you think there's been a mood change within New Zealand on that, that's more of a cooperative partnership of farmers and environmental interest groups working together? What's been your... what have you noticed in that space, Mark?
Yeah, I think there's good opportunity for that. We have in Taranaki, for example, an overarching organisation called Wild for Taranaki that works in that way to bring together a range of interested environmental groups and targeting various projects to work on. One of the big things, though, of course, is going back to the QE2 covenants, because it's quite important that if you're doing community-orientated work around private land, if you've also got a covenant in place, you know that that's got long-term protection. And also we have some good programs, again, through the regional council. They have what's called a K&E project. That's a key native ecosystem. And so there's additional funding available for remnants of bush, wetland, what have you, restoration programs that you can get funding to assist in that. So there's lots of opportunity already out there. And I think the incentives are good, and the desire from landowners is that they welcome these opportunities.
Can I say that this is all fantastic, and I'm thrilled to hear what's been going on, but I do get a sense of this is happening over there, we'll put a fence up and we'll do this good thing in this little patch of land, but in our farming, this is how we do it. And I've been doing a bit of looking and a bit of reading and watching things that talking about regenerative farming and soil health and that long-term care and how much carbon capture can happen if soil is dealt with the right way in all of the farming environment, not just in the edges around the rivers. So that's all really good things, but I'm hoping that we'll have that incentive to continue to see what good farming practice itself looks like.
I mean, things are better than they are. Sometimes transformational change takes a generation. Would that be fair?
Absolutely. And, you know, like we all, I mean, I've seen some horrific things about how Lake Taupō has not yet had the impact of all the inputs that it's had around it for the last 100 years because it's so big. So we've got this kind of impending wave of problems that we have created by our actions already that we haven't yet seen the results of. And so I'm really, really keen to have this conversation around what good looks like in the entire system, not just around the edges, and passing that information back and forth through the farming community to get these good best practices going and making the whole farm a good environmental outcome, not just around the edges.
Yeah, I mean, it is such a complicated but such an important situation. I think we can lose a lot of energy arguing with each other about how it should be done rather than saying, hey, let's each do what we can, although that's the very nature of politics, of course, is various people arguing about how their way is the best way of doing things. The panel discussion today looking at the topic of the environment. We are live on Rima, but also live streaming on Rima Facebook, on the Star Network Facebook, on Shine TV and Life FM as well. Interested in your comments. If you are watching on social media, feel free to comment there, and we will get to your comments a little bit later on, but we'll be back with more from the panel in just a moment.
The panel. It's the election conversation on Rima.
We had both tried on anywhere up until that point.
Christian singles are finding love.
Panel. It's the election conversation on Rima.
Talking the environment today on the panel, what changes should the government put in place in terms of policies? Various political parties, in fact, I think all of the political parties have got an environmental policy, how they're going to change the world and why we should vote for them. That's their job, but what our job is to decide which one of those parties' policies best matches our interests and our values, which one makes the most sense in terms of actual positive, sustainable environmental change. I've got some guests in the studio and also online. Sarah, wanting to talk with you first up, talking about sustainable energy, because again, New Zealand's probably better than most. We don't have nuclear power plants. We are burning less coal than we used to. But I suppose in terms of the long term, your thoughts on how we can get better at energy generation?
I feel that there are two parts to this.
Yep.
New Zealand, as you said, already has some really great advantages when it comes to natural resources, which we can continue to use, particularly wind, I think. I've heard from people who have travelled in Europe, and there are just wind farms everywhere, and
Yep.
we just aren't seeing enough of that in New Zealand yet. But I also think that there's a very strong conversation about just using less. I feel like I'm really grateful that the government is doing an energy conservation home insulation program that's rolling out. It's not grabbing headlines because it's an incremental change, but I think that kind of thing, and actually choosing to come up with ways that you can use less energy, that you can drive less, that you can fly less, that you can all of these ways that we use energy at the moment. Yes, it's great when we do it sustainably, but I'm sorry, everyone in the country driving a Tesla is not going to solve all of these problems.
And it is that sort of, I suppose, different tiers of society, and participation is so important if it's going to be a movement that we can all connect to. I can't afford a Tesla. I don't own a farm. Does that mean I've opted out? How can we get higher participation from people that don't fit those categories?
And I think one of the ways of doing that is actually connecting the dots, is telling the stories, is making it's not just about you and recycling. It's about the impact down the stream to your local neighbour, to your national neighbour, and to your global neighbour. As a Christian, we talk about the least, the last, and the lost. And those are the people that are suffering most from the climate crisis. We will be fine. I will be okay. I can move if I have to. I can change. I can buy a car if I need to, right? This is a conscious decision for me, but there are plenty of people in the world that don't have the choices that we have. So I feel that we have a responsibility to make the most of the advantages that we have, and actually say we are going to make a conscious choice to help make the world a better place. And I'm going to do that by flying a bit less this year and not tripping around the countryside at the drop of a hat. It's a hard personal decision to make.
It is a good point that you make, though, because so often with politics and elections, we vote for the person that will give us the most personal benefit for our lifestyle and interests. With the environment, of course, it is such a bigger picture. The policies impact not just us, but literally people downstream, or literally people who have less resources to engage and participate with society. I mean, this is a good point made there. Mark, wanting to get your comments on this. You were talking before about I suppose tree planting and river management. This is a good start, but in terms of land productivity, do we need to have perhaps deeper conversations about some land perhaps being more suitable than others? In urban environments, they're talking about managed retreat with climate change. Is it perhaps important to have the conversation, let's not build houses on productive land, let's not necessarily farm erosion-prone hills so much anymore, having some broader questions about land use and whether or not it's always fit for purpose?
Yeah, that's an important and an ongoing discussion, and it's not it's something that again that you have to be careful in terms of how you perhaps make those decisions, though, because it's not necessarily a clear cut answer. And we saw, for example, in the cyclone situation that areas that have been replanted in trees in the last since Cyclone Bowler the last time around, we had sustained just as much damage as areas that were still in pasture. So there's risks either way. But I think it is one aspect in terms of looking at part of addressing the issue and the problem that we have in a lot of our, particularly sheep and beef rural communities, hill country communities, is the wholesale conversion of farms to forestry, and that tends to have a negative impact on local communities. And one of the solutions to that, of course, is the identifying of land use classes within farm properties that are suitable for either plantation forestry or permanent forestry, and being able to provide the right mechanisms to enable that to happen, and therefore also retain the food productivity of the rest of the land, which I think we've always got to come back to that point to remember that sustainability in food production is also vital in terms of being able to feed an expanding global population over time. And so we need to look at the introduction of new technologies and stuff. It's not always a solution just to go less. As such, we need to understand what impacts are of various practices over time and introduce new technologies that enable us to do better with less, probably going forward. So there's quite a lot of opportunity there, I think, particularly coming back to these issues around what the government role is in terms of opening up the way for better use of technologies and things that we can utilise, such as gene editing, that enabled us to get better productivity off the key land that we've got. And also, as you say, protecting food producing land. That's always a little bit controversial. And, in New Zealand, we like to have that flexibility around, what we can do with our land as owners in terms of who we sell it to. But there is some merit in looking at what the key food producing areas are and providing at least some level of protection over those. But again, we have to be careful that we don't end up with a whole lot of reverse sensitivity issues if we get the settings wrong there.
Looking at certain things, I know in South Dunedin they're looking at a managed retreat and buying out some landowners that just their houses have been built on a floodplain about 100 years ago before we started to have this climate impact. Again, for farmers in different parts of the country, it's all very well if you're in Canterbury, but if you've got a farm in the King Country, you've got more hill paddocks than you have flat land. Honestly, we would need to manage that land use change so that it's not too much of a disincentivization for people whose families have been on the land for generations.
Yeah, I think, though, I guess, it's a little bit different situation if you're talking about a managed retreat in terms of a housing area versus land area. You can see that in a farming context, if you've got a good resilience in your business, these kind of weather events, they come and go over time. And in the meantime, between those events, there's a lot of good productivity that can be gained in terms of food production. So we have to be careful that we don't set regulation that kind of leads to managed retreat for the wrong reasons. It wants to be genuine reasons that perhaps there is opportunities for some kind of genuine environmental improvement outcome versus just perhaps making wholesale assessments on what we think risk factors might be.
So
but
planning for worst case scenario rather than
people to make that.
Sorry to cut across there, but planning for worst case scenario rather than living there constantly is what you're saying.
Well, I think in a farming context, people will make that decision based on market indicators more than anything else, and they'll learn to structure their businesses in such a way and plant out the environment in such a way that gives them best protection in the case of fluctuating weather events.
Ronan, wanting to bring you in on this one, because I think there's a bit of a false dichotomy that when it comes to productivity, it's the opposite of the environment. We can have economics or we can care for the environment. That an environmental option is bad for the economy, it's bad for productivity, and both, in your opinion?
Yeah, I would first off agree with you that it is a false dichotomy. There's heaps of green jobs available. There's and I think New Zealand has been a world leader in so many ways on so many issues, and I think we really could be a world leader here. We could be a world leader on green farming, we could be a world leader on green jobs, we could be a world leader in the green economy more broadly. And I think the government should really take a leading role in helping New Zealand develop our green economy and helping New Zealand take that leading role, lead by example, show the world how to have a green economy, how to be a developed country with an amazing green economy, with a positive with a positive example of how to do this, how to do these things right, how to look after our environment, how to look after our indigenous fauna and flora, how to look after our country, how to look after our planet.
There was a lot of noise, particularly post-COVID, when we were all allowed out of our homes again, about green jobs made available, and these were going to be shovel-ready projects, and there was going to be employment for the disenfranchised masses. Certainly from my point of view, I mean, you guys are probably literally closer to the ground on this than I am. Did that ever happen at the scale that was promised? Your thoughts, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about scale, but I certainly know of a project out in the Waitakares near Bethel's Beach, where there's been an amazing amount of work being able to be done that is benefiting the environment, but also benefiting the people, and that came out of those COVID-related settings.
Bethel's Beach, of course, unfortunately a poster child for what happens when you don't look after your environment.
Well, exactly, and yet this area is a place called Matuku Link, which is a wetland conservation reserve, and when it floods, it's supposed to flood, but it's doing well because it's been cared for in the last kind of 5 or 10 years by a group of dedicated people, and they took advantage of those COVID settings. So, you know, there is, as Ronan said, there's a lot out there that is available, and, you know, if I can use a very brief example, humans are hugely creative, and if you put some boundaries in place, they'll figure out a way. So I live in West Auckland. There was a reworking of the St Luke's motorway interchange, and there was a conversation around cutting down all the Pūtakawa trees, or a large section of them alongside Western Springs, and people objected, and the government said no, you can't do that, and funnily enough they figured out a way to rejig the motorway interchange without cutting down the trees, and the trees are still there. And you know, if someone hadn't said no, you can't do that, we have to do this, otherwise we can't do what we need to do, and yet when the decision was made that they couldn't do it, somehow the motorway interchange got rejigged and the trees are still there.
And Mark, your thoughts on this, because again it is a bit of a false dichotomy. You need to have a balance where you've got the productivity, you can still break even and care for your land and produce food on it, not just all about economic values, but that doesn't have to be in contrast to environmental values.
No, and in fact, it's essential that you have got profitability there. Essentially, you have to be in the black if you're going to be green. You can't do it from in the red. And you know, in the most extreme examples, you know, we would see those in areas that are severely impacted by poverty. You know, they'll cut down the last tree, they'll shoot the last tiger, or whatever the case might be, in order to support their family for a short period of time. So we need to always be reminding ourselves of that productivity, profitability, being able to produce good quality, wholesome food, to be able to expand that food production going forward, to be able to feed the planet, and to do it in a sustainable way are the key elements to having good environmental outcomes. And so, yeah, you've got to have that first. Even right at the moment, you know, what we're seeing is is dairy farming is in a commodity slump. We've got a significant cost of farming crisis on us with rising interest rates, high input costs, and lowering commodities. And you're going to see a pullback in the next couple of years in terms of the investment that people can put into projects and stuff like that.
Yep.
Their investments into new precision agricultural techniques, which allow better use of the resources and things they've got. They'll just have to pull back on those things over the next couple of years. So we need to see those cycles come back, and good investment in new technology, precision agriculture, environmental projects and stuff in order to be able to continue to get good outcomes going forward.
Great line, Mark, by the way. You've got to be in the black in order to be green. That's that'd be a great political slogan, although people would go, oh no, that's this colour is that party, etc. But anyway, we won't go into that. Hey, guys, thank you so much. We've just got a few more minutes left in the panel today, but I wanted to do a couple of quick fire rounds, if that's okay. Ronan, going to start with you. The question is, and try and limit it to one, short answers, what is one policy that you would see would have the biggest positive impact on their environment?
Boy, that's a big one. One policy.
Yep.
Yeah, not sure what to go for that one.
Do you want us to come back to you on that?
Yeah, if you could, that would be great.
Yeah, I guess for me, what I see is I would love to see carbon pricing be a real thing that impacts people's economic decisions. So if you appropriately price carbon, whether it's through the ETS or another mechanism, people will make better decisions because they will be based on economic decisions.
Yep.
And the what you get from, let's say people pay a cost for carbon, is that you can then support the farmers that Mark is talking about to make better decisions and incentivise them to be reducing their carbons. But the market pricing has to be in place, otherwise people will just fly everywhere because they can.
Mark, your thoughts. One policy that would have the biggest positive impact on the environment?
Okay, I'm going to go right out left field here. I'm going to say that we need to open up further oil and gas exploration offshore. Mm-hmm. Basically, we need a good supply of particularly our clean natural gas in order to be able to perform well as a country, to get the kind of investment and the profitability that we need. And to be able to support growth going forward. And again, if you've got good sources of low-cost energy, that then creates further opportunities for expansion into other areas. And one of the biggest policy changes we need in terms of being able to get expansion into other energy areas is changes to the Resource Management Act. So we need really comprehensive resource management reform that would enable it to make it possible to go for more wind or solar farming. At the moment, these are hampered considerably by risk and by consenting hold-ups and costs.
Good answer there. I'm going to have to stop you. We're running out of time. Strategic to throw that in at the end. Ronan, your thoughts. What's a positive policy?
I'll go with no new mines on the conservation estate and making sure they stick to it this time.
That seems very reasonable indeed. Now, finally on this, what is one thing that each of us can do as individuals to help the environment? Sarah, starting with you.
I think basing our decisions on our values.
Okay.
So if we are clear as Christians that we care about our global neighbour, our local neighbour, then connecting those dots and basing our decisions on those values.
Ronan, your thoughts. What's one thing we could each do?
I'll go with getting out in our local community and finding something, even something small that we can do to make it better and more environmentally friendly. If that's if that's getting weeds out of a small bush in the local community, if that's something small like that. Just doing something like that, it makes the community better, it makes it more environmentally friendly, it makes it better.
Mark, final word to you. One thing we could each do to make the world a better place in that regard.
Well, I'm going to take it from a farmer perspective, and as I've mentioned earlier, there's huge potential across New Zealand's farms in terms of Indigenous biodiversity protection and what have you, and I think just making sure we get the settings right, that we support our farmers and just encourage them in the work that they're doing. There's huge scope for further investment in environmental projects across our private landholders, so we should make the most of it.
Guys, Mark, Ronan, Sarah, thank you so much. It's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you for all of the people listening. This will be available to watch on social media at a later time. This has been The Panel this morning on Rima. Thank you so much for joining us.
The Panel. It's the election conversation on Rima.